wanted to take a few minutes to talk about and help people understand the difference between a SIA and a product that's on the market that also activates the Nrf2 pathway. It's actually a product that's made of 5 herbs and spices: ashwagandha, milk thistle, turmeric, bacopa, and green tea. It comes in a tablet form. I was first introduced to this technology, again another technology, right? And that whole process of antioxidant activation at a cellular level back in 2010. It was actually the reason why I didn't look at a SIA, because someone showed me a SIA after I'd started working with that particular product, and I was totally enamored of the science that they had accumulated to that point. I also got to actually work and talk to the scientists behind the whole thing. And at that point I was running a functional medicine clinic, and so we really had a wonderful opportunity to talk hand in hand with him on a regular basis to ask questions about how to use that product in our clinic. And I went to a lot of the medical conferences and got to listen and look at the science that they were doing behind that work. So I do understand a lot about that product, and I had a lot of experience of actually recommending it in our clinic to our clients. So what is the difference, and why is it that at this point in my life I certainly believe that they are entirely different? And I'll explain why I think that, and why I believe that if you have to make a choice over what you would spend your money on, I absolutely would be putting it with a SIA and not the other product. So Nrf2 receptors, or Nrf2 receptors, I'm sure you probably are familiar with our double-blind study, the Tourette Lab study. And in that, as you all know, part of that whole process was these 5 genes that they mapped. I just want you to think about the fact that they actually mapped, no, let's get it right, they actually changed hundreds of genes, but genetic studies and science of genes is still a new field. So it's not like it's been around for centuries and we know an awful lot about everything to do with it. So what they talked about was the ones that they're fully mapped and they really understand. But you may also remember within that is something called the ERG2 pathway, the inflammatory signaling pathway. So those of you who've seen this study will remember pathway 4 is a door that is opened up within this gene signaling pathway. So the pathway opens up and it opens up 15 other doors behind it. This one, the 4th pathway, you'll remember if you look at this, actually is that Nrf2 pathway. So the very fundamental difference is that the other product is activating this, whereas a SIA is activating all of this. And we haven't even talked about what this influences or these other 4 pathways influence, but we know for definite here in that inflammatory signaling pathway that the Nrf2 is one of 15 pathways that a SIA is changing. So I did not appreciate that, and I think the challenge is, because they do have a lot of background science, that the mindset is really no different than politics, right? You know, people have 2 different opposing opinions, and when somebody puts forward an opposing opinion from the one that you hold, if you're really, really passionate about where you stand, you probably don't want to hear it. So that would be a similar kind of situation that we often find ourselves in, and I certainly have found myself in when I've met people subsequently, now I'm really involved in a SIA, who will want to say, and I'm sure those of you who've been in that situation, where's the double-blind published studies on a SIA? So here's a really important piece to understand about this, and it took me probably about a year to knock myself against the side of the head and go, aha. Think back, so superoxide dismutase is a redox molecule, right? It took 30 years for them to study that it actually was a redox molecule, and that has spurred the next 20 years of redox biochemistry research. If we think back to how Vertus Norton first got involved in this, right? What did he get involved in? A company that was working in studying these molecules, even though they really didn't know that they were redox molecules at that point. They were manufacturing them, right? He was given one of these little machines to take home and to actually manufacture the redox molecules on the spot and to drink them, which is why he knew that they benefited him. This was my aha. What is this, for example, right? There's the brand name, right? You saw that briefly, Kleenex. So Kleenex is a brand name. It's a trade name for what is inside, which is Kleenex. Tissues, the tissue is inside. So when we look at a bottle of ASEA is the brand name for the redox molecules which are inside. The making of redox molecules and the studying of redox molecules is not new, right? People have been making these things, and that's why Verdis had a chance to experience it for at least 20 years, which is why the published studies are on the redox molecules. So if you look at PubMed and you type in redox, you will see that there's over 200,000 studies on that. Since I joined ASEA, there were about 12,000 on the words redox signaling. There's now about 18,000. So redox molecules and the production of them is not a new thing. It's not exclusive to ASEA. So it's not ASEA's product that one needs to say you have to have a double-blind study on ASEA's product, because we're not testing the brand name ASEA. What people are studying is a redox molecule which science has been able to produce for 2 decades. So the double-blind studies on the technology of redox molecules are there, right? And we know ASEA does its own double-blind research, at least it's third party. It's sent out for other people to conduct that. But I'm really glad that we're not actually in the field of trying to do disease-based double-blind studies that are getting published on PubMed, because we are in the realm of nutritional supplementation. And if any of you look at, for example, that lovely website called Science Based Medicine, we know that it knocks ASEA and it'll say, oh, you know, it's just salt water. But if you look at it actually after, and you research this particular product as well, that we're talking about, the tablet, it knocks that one too. It goes into great detail as to why some of their double-blind studies are highly flawed. I'm not casting aspersions on this, and please don't think that I'm trying to say they are, but what I want to reference is that, as the same as Dr. Silverman always says, go back through and find everything that they publish on, because they knock everything because they're drug-based in the background of it. So understand that. So when people say, well, where are the double-blind studies on ASEA? The fact is, we're not asking, why would we double-blind study a trade name? Right? The studies are on the redox molecules, and those are out there. They've been there for 20 years. People can manufacture them. We aren't first to the market with making them. We are first to the market with stabilization, and that is the difference that we found. Thank heavens for Dr. Samuelson. They found a way to keep them around longer than the 20 to 30 minutes that they're being used in clinical studies. We have a cardiologist that we know who will tell you that they order redox signaling molecules, particular ones, for a particular cardiovascular operation. They have to order them at a time to arrive very specifically during the operation, otherwise they're not active. There you go, right? So when people want to say, well, you know, ours is double-blind, crossover, placebo, published studies on that particular product, they too have patents, and so people have had to study that tablet, right? We don't have a patent on redox molecules. We have a patent on the production that brings it to a stabilized version that can get out commercially. So it's not about whether we have published studies on our product, because that's being studied all the time, which is why there is 21 years of conferences, you know, in the annual conferences for redox biochemistry. This is their 21st year. So the studying of redox molecules and the production of redox molecules is not a new thing. And so please don't get sidewinded when people say to you, well, we're your double-blind studies, because it's actually comparing apples and oranges, or at least asking for answers to things that are apples and oranges. So for me, here was the kicker. My husband had an exercise-induced breathing issue for 26 years. We believed in the science of that other supplement that changes the Nrf2 pathway. And I had him on that product from 2010 to 2017 when we first came to use ASEA. Within 2 weeks of being on the full spectrum of redox molecules, which is what ASEA provides, as opposed to just the Nrf2 mechanism, his exercise-induced breathing issue changed so dramatically that he was able to get his life back, get off inhalers and get out and do things. In 7 years of being committed to that other product, that never changed. So that was a big aha for me. And understand that an Nrf2 is about antioxidants. We have another study, right, in ASEA on the double-blind placebo study which was done, but this is actually looking at blood work. We know that it activated and increased the internal antioxidant production of glutathione and superoxide dismutase. Superoxide dismutase is an antioxidant, glutathione is an antioxidant. They are both redox molecules, as is nitric oxide, as is hydrogen peroxide. All of those are redox molecules, and the difference is that that other product is only working on the Nrf2 pathway, whereas when you take ASEA, it's working on multiple pathways, because you're providing the complete spectrum of redox molecules, not picking out on one or two. But the Nrf2 pathway was such a big aha at the time for me, because it was so exciting, because this is like switching on your mains plug to the house, right? You go and you flick the switch and all the lights turn on in one go, bingo. It was the way to produce more and more internal enzyme, antioxidant enzymes from every single cell at the same time. So that's what the Nrf2 pathway does. It does it with that other product, but it also does it obviously with ASEA, because it's the same pathway that's working. And to turn on those antioxidant pathways is the difference between switching on a plug, or switch rather at your panel and everything goes on, or going around and turning on the lights in every room one after the other. We consume antioxidants, but there is just no way that you can consume enough to do what it does when you actually activate those redox molecules and those pathways internally. There was another thing I wanted to say about this, which was really important to me. There's actually another company, and I really only had this aha last night when I was thinking back to, there was another company that I investigated their products, and their whole mechanism, I sat down and talked with that scientist, their whole mechanism was actually about using nitric oxide as a precursor signaling mechanism before you consumed your nutrition, because as they were talking about, and their whole shtick with what they were doing was, you consume nutrition, but unless you've got good signaling, you don't really absorb and use that nutrition so well. So that was a great aha for me. I just didn't like the company's products, but the mechanism and the science behind it made sense. But this is what we're doing here with ASEA. We are using that redox molecule of nitric oxide as a signaling mechanism to help absorption of food. And I know that to be the case because I've watched this in the last 2 years in my practice, and as a digestive health specialist, that's the whole focus of what I'm really looking at, along with gut-brain connection and everything else. But my real specialty is that love of how do we absorb what we consume, which takes me to the notion that the reason I prefer ASEA is because it is a signaling liquid. So I'm not knocking the effectiveness of the other product and their science, but from my perspective as a digestive health specialist, if you're over 25, you've already started to get a compromised digestive system, because we lose the ability to produce the pH that we need to activate the enzyme production and drop the pH in the stomach. So we have to get down pretty low. It has to be a 2.0, which is very, very acidic for you to actually activate all of the mechanisms of digestion adequately. That doesn't happen for most people. Certainly by the time they're 27, which is by the time they're 40, they're already struggling with digestion. So from my perspective, here's the difficulty. You may have something that in a combination is shown to affect and improve the Nrf2 pathway, but there's a long way between the mouth and absorption. And I always view it as like a hurdle race, right? There's lots and lots of hurdles between the mouth and getting it into the tissue that we have to negotiate and navigate. And knowing how compromised most people's digestive systems are, that is the major challenge with any supplement, is absorption. So for me, tablets are a very old delivery system that has a big challenge. You have to break them down much more than you would a capsule. And that's why I would go from tablets to capsules to liquids, because liquids are more absorbable. You bypass a lot of those challenges that people have. So if I'm going to make a choice about how I want to improve, I would not at this point take a tablet that has to be broken down and the materials have to be metabolized and used to influence the tissue level to increase that Nrf2 pathway, when I can just do a signaling mechanism with a sear and put it in my mouth and bingo, it's working already. So I hope that might be helpful. Because I know that I've had a lot of people recently talking about the fact, well, I met somebody else who's using this other supplement and they are hardcore believers. That's fine. I'm not trying to convince them, but it might help you give some context, because if you're not familiar with what their product is, it's difficult to counter the fact that they are pretty passionate about what they have because of the science that that the company has put into what they're doing. And so, you know, you may also find yourself confronted with this whole thing about, well, where are your double-blind placebo published studies on PubMed? Ours are out there. And, you know, we're talking apples and oranges at that point, remember, again. So anyway, I hope that helps. Appreciate it. Take care, everyone.